When my entitled neighbors screamed at me that I was just a pathetic widow who should shut up and mind her own business while demanding I stop interfering with their loud parties and property violations, because I was too old and irrelevant to understand how the modern world works. They had no idea they were yelling at Margaret Wellington, the founder and CEO of Wellington Properties, the $2.3 billion real estate empire that owned their entire neighborhood, including the luxury townhouse they'd been renting for 3 years, whose property management division controlled over 40,000 rental units across the Pacific Northwest, and whose investment portfolio included the shopping centers where they worked, the apartment complexes where their friends lived, and the commercial properties that housed their favorite restaurants and gyms, all while they dismissed their lonely old neighbor as a powerless burden who should stay in her lane and stop bothering successful young professionals, never knowing that their cruel words would cost them their $500 a month rental home and force them to literally beg for mercy while standing on the sidewalk with their belongings, learning that sometimes the irrelevant widow you dismiss actually holds the keys to everything you think you own. Make sure to hit that like button if you've ever been underestimated because of your age or gender. Drop a comment about your worst experience with entitled neighbors who thought they could walk all over you, and subscribe, because you won't believe what happens when disrespectful tenants discover that their powerless old lady neighbor actually owns everything they depend on to live their comfortable lives. My name is Margaret Wellington. I'm 74 years old, and this story begins on September when I returned from what my neighbors Bradley Harrison and Jessica Chen thought was just another lonely widow's doctor's appointment in downtown Seattle, but was actually a quarterly board meeting with Wellington Properties Executive Committee where I'd been finalizing the acquisition strategy that would either secure my tenants' long-term housing stability or result in immediate eviction proceeding, depending entirely on how they chose to treat the elderly woman whose property empire had been quietly ensuring their neighborhood remained one of the most desirable residential areas in the Pacific Northwest. The modest two-story Craftsman house where I've lived for the past 12 years, located in the heart of Seattle's prestigious Magnolia neighborhood, appears to visitors as the simple retirement home of a widowed former teacher who survives on Social Security and the occasional assistance from adult children who live too far away to visit regularly. The carefully maintained front garden featuring lavender, roses, and native Pacific Northwest plants that I tend personally each morning suggests someone whose greatest pleasure comes from nurturing small growing things and maintaining connection to the natural world that provides comfort during the solitary years of late-life independence. The vintage 2018 Honda Civic that sits in my single-car garage, always meticulously clean and serviced at the same local mechanic for the past 6 years, tells a story of practical frugality rather than automotive enthusiasm. The modest grocery shopping trips to the neighborhood Safeway, where I use manufacturer coupons and carefully compare prices on fixed-income essentials like canned soup, whole-grain bread, and generic medication, reinforce the image of someone who makes thoughtful financial decisions within the constraints of retirement budgeting that affects millions of elderly Americans. What my neighbors Bradley and Jessica observed during our occasional sidewalk conversations is exactly what I've cultivated since my husband Robert passed away 14 years ago, a sweet but slightly overwhelmed elderly woman who struggles with smartphone apps, needs help understanding property tax notices that seem to grow more complicated every year, and whose greatest social excitement comes from monthly book club meetings at the neighborhood library and weekly volunteer shifts at the Magnolia Community Center, where I help organize charity drives and coordinate meal delivery services for homebound seniors who face even greater isolation and mobility challenges than my own relatively manageable situation. The image of gentle Margaret Wellington, with her sensible cardigans from Nordstrom Rack, comfortable walking shoes from Payless, and tendency to repeat stories about the good old days when neighbors looked out for each other, has served me perfectly in maintaining privacy while protecting the real estate empire that Bradley and Jessica have never suspected exists beneath their elderly neighbor's humble facade of retirement living and community involvement. The house that Bradley and Jessica dismiss as just another modest family home in a neighborhood full of overpriced real estate actually serves as my private command center for operations that extend across 14 states and include residential properties, commercial development, industrial complexes, and mixed-use projects worth collectively $2.3 billion in current market valuation. The modest living room with its cheerful displays of family photos, my late husband Robert's military service portraits, my children's college graduation grandchildren I see during holiday visits, and carefully organized bookshelves featuring mystery novels, gardening guides, and local history collections, conceals sophisticated business coordination systems, where I manage property portfolios that oversee development projects in 23 cities, and direct investment strategies that have made me one of the Pacific Northwest's most influential but invisible real estate leaders. The family photos themselves tell a carefully curated story of a grandmother whose greatest pride comes from successful adult children who've made respectable middle-class lives in distant cities, pursuing careers in education, health, and public service that reflect the values Robert and I instilled during their formative years. My daughter Sarah's nursing career in Denver, my son Michael's work as a high school principal in Portland, and my youngest daughter, Lisa's position as a social worker in Spokane, all hang in modest frames throughout my living room, positioned where visitors can see them immediately upon entering, and understand that my vicarious pride in family accomplishments represents the closest I'll ever come to understanding the complex business and technology worlds that drive modern economic development. My morning routine, as observed by Bradley and Jessica during their occasional walks through the neighborhood with their energetic golden retriever, reinforces every assumption about my limited capabilities and complete dependence on Social Security and family financial support. They see me shuffling around my front garden at 7 a.m., wearing a faded bathrobe over a nightgown that suggests someone who has nowhere important to go, and no schedule more demanding than watering plants and checking for mail delivery that rarely includes anything more interesting than medication notices and grocery store circulars advertising weekly specials on items that fit comfortably within fixed income budgeting constraints. What Bradley and Jessica don't see is the sophisticated technology infrastructure hidden throughout my house that enables me to coordinate business operation across 6 time zones, while maintaining the appearance of a confused retiree who needs help figuring out how to update her cable television subscription, or understand why her internet service occasionally experiences outages during peak usage periods. Behind the false wall in my home office, accessible through a biometric scanner disguised as a vintage jewelry box that Robert gave me for our 40th wedding anniversary, lies a command center that would impress the technology teams at most Fortune. The enterprise-grade fiber optic internet connection that enters my house through a discrete utility installation and connects directly to my hidden office provides bandwidth capabilities that exceed what most Seattle tech startups can afford for their entire operation. The multiple monitor displays, when activated through voice commands that Bradley and Jessica have never heard because they assume I'm too technologically challenged to use anything more sophisticated than a landline telephone with large buttons, show real-time data streams from Wellington Properties operations throughout the United States, including occupancy rates from apartment complexes in Los Angeles, construction progress from mixed-use developments in Phoenix, and rental market analysis from commercial properties in Chicago, Atlanta, and Miami. The quantum-encrypted communication systems that connect me to development teams, property managers, legal partners, and investment advisors throughout the world operate on frequencies that major corporations use for their most sensitive business communication. The secure document servers, accessible only through multi-factor authentication that includes retinal scanning, voice recognition, and biometric verification, contain strategic plans for real estate acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Partnership agreements with construction companies, whose names would be instantly recognizable to anyone who follows commercial development news, and competitive intelligence reports that predict housing market trends 18 months before they become apparent to traditional real estate analysts. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of my hidden infrastructure is the AI-powered monitoring system that tracks every mention of Wellington Properties, my personal name, and related business activities across the internet, social media platforms, traditional news sources, and public records databases. This system, developed by my own team of cybersecurity specialists, ensures that my privacy remains protected while providing real-time alerts about any potential threats to my anonymity, security, or business operations. The irony that I've achieved complete digital invisibility while running one of the West Coast's most influential real estate development companies would be apparent to Bradley and Jessica if they possessed the sophistication to recognize the contradiction between my apparent technological helplessness and the fact that no personal information about Margaret Wellington appears in any search engine results. My house occupies a corner lot on one of Magnolia's most prestigious residential streets, which I purchased through a network of shell companies in a transaction that appeared in public records as an investment by Pacific Northwest Holdings LLC, a name generic enough to avoid attracting attention while providing the legal framework necessary for strategic real estate development throughout the Seattle metropolitan area. The property's current valuation of $4.2 million reflects both Magnolia's transformation into one of Seattle's most exclusive neighborhoods and the strategic improvements I've coordinated to ensure that my headquarters remains both inconspicuous and operationally sophisticated. The basement level, which building permits and insurance records describe as finished recreational space with home office capabilities, but actually contains my primary workspace, enterprise-grade server rooms, and secure meeting facilities where I conduct face-to-face negotiations with development partner municipal officials and international investors, whose identities would surprise anyone who assumes that important real estate business happens only in glass towers with corporate logos and marble lobby. The custom-designed basement office features a conference room with holographic display capabilities that enable real-time collaboration with Wellington Properties team members in our regional offices throughout California, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and Arizona. The furniture appears to be standard home office equipment purchased from local suppliers, but each piece contains hidden technology that provides secure communications, environmental monitoring, and emergency protocols that could relocate me from the house within 60 seconds if security threats were detected by the property's AI monitoring system. The attached garage, which appears to house only my modest Honda Civic and standard household storage, actually contains server farms with processing power that rivals what major universities use for complex research projects. The climate control system, disguised as standard residential HVAC equipment, maintain optimal operating temperatures for quantum computing processors that run predictive algorithms for real estate markets, demographic trend analysis, and economic forecasting that gives Wellington Properties competitive advantages worth millions of dollars in strategic decision-making about property acquisitions, development timing, and market positioning. The house's external appearance carefully maintains the aesthetic of a well-maintained but unremarkable residential property that fits seamlessly into Magnolia's architectural character. The solar panels on the roof appear to be standard residential installations designed to reduce utility costs for environmentally conscious retirees, but actually provide redundant power systems that ensure my operations continue uninterrupted, even during major power grid failures that affect the broader Seattle area. The discrete satellite communication equipment, camouflaged as standard television and internet service installation, provides backup connectivity that operates independently of commercial service providers and remains functional during natural disasters or cyber attacks that might disable conventional infrastructure. Perhaps the most significant aspect of my carefully maintained image is how completely it has concealed my role as the founder and CEO of Wellington Properties, the real estate empire that has quietly dominated residential development, commercial construction, and property management throughout the Pacific Northwest for the past 35 years. My partnership with visionary architects, strategic investors, and municipal planners has created a network of housing development, shopping centers, office complex, and mixed-use projects that determines which communities thrive and which struggle to attract the investment necessary for sustainable economic development in an increasingly competitive, regional market. Wellington Properties operates through a complex structure of subsidiaries, holding companies and management agreements that ensure both privacy and operational efficiency across multiple real estate sectors. The company's public face consists of professional property manager, regulatory affairs specialists, and media relations teams, who handle all external communications, while protecting my identity as the ultimate decision-maker, whose strategic vision guides every aspect of the company's operations, from land acquisition to tenant relations policies that affect tens of thousands of families throughout the region. Our corporate structure includes Wellington Residential Services, which provides property management for over 40,000 rental units, ranging from luxury apartments in downtown Seattle to affordable housing complexes in suburban communities throughout Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. Wellington Commercial Development designs and constructs the shopping centers, office buildings, and industrial facilities that provide employment and commercial services for growing communities that depend on strategic investment to support population growth and economic development. Wellington Investment Partners identifies and develops mixed-use projects that combine residential, commercial, and recreational facilities in ways that create sustainable community environments, while generating returns that justify continued expansion and innovation. But the most crucial aspect of Wellington Properties' influence is our ownership of the fundamental residential infrastructure that powers the Pacific Northwest's population growth and economic development. Our apartment complexes, strategically located throughout major metropolitan areas, provide housing for 68% of the region's rental market. Our commercial properties house the businesses that employ hundreds of thousands of workers, whose families depend on access to affordable quality housing that enables them to build stable lives and contribute to community development. Our development projects create the mixed-use environments that attract new residents, support local businesses, and generate the property tax revenue that funds schools, parks, emergency services, and infrastructure maintenance that benefits entire community. The daily routine that Bradley and Jessica observe during our neighborly interactions reinforces their assumptions about my limited capabilities and complete financial dependence on Social Security and occasional family assistance. They see me expressing gratitude for their occasional offers to help with yard work or snow removal assistance I could hire professional services to provide, but that I accept graciously to maintain my cover identity as someone who appreciates community support and neighborly cooperation during the challenges of aging and fixed-income living. What Bradley and Jessica don't see are the 5 a.m. video conferences with development teams in Portland, San Francisco, Phoenix, and Denver, where I coordinate construction projects that will influence how hundreds of thousands of people experience housing and community development over the next decade. They don't witness the strategic planning sessions that happen after our casual sidewalk conversation, where I analyze market intelligence reports that predict which neighborhoods will experience gentrification, which communities will require affordable housing initiatives, and which development opportunities could provide Wellington Properties with crucial market positions or social impact potential. They've never observed the private consultations where I coordinate major real estate acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars, partnership agreements that create new community development standards, and infrastructure investments that determine whether emerging neighborhoods develop as inclusive communities that serve diverse populations, or exclusive enclaves that perpetuate economic segregation and social inequality. The relationships I've developed with municipal officials, environmental planners, and community leaders over 3 decades of strategic networking remain completely invisible to Bradley and Jessica, who assume that my social interactions consist primarily of small talk with elderly neighbors and occasional conversations with librarians about book recommendations and community volunteer opportunities. They have no idea that my contact list includes mayors, city council member, environmental scientists, and the principal architects for development projects that will determine how the Pacific Northwest manages population growth, climate change adaptation, and economic development for the next 50 years. This brings me to the painful irony of my neighbors Bradley and Jessica's situation. For the past 3 years, they have been living in one of Wellington Properties' premium rental units, a beautifully renovated 1920s townhouse that combines historical architectural details with modern amenities and energy-efficient systems that make it one of the most desirable residential properties in the Magnolia neighborhood. Their $4,500 monthly rent, which they consider reasonable for a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home, with a private garden and dedicated parking space, actually represents a strategic investment in community development that prioritizes long-term neighborhood stability over maximum profit extraction. Their success in securing such an attractive rental property in one of Seattle's most competitive housing markets wasn't simply the result of good timing, strong credit scores, or persuasive rental applications. The availability of their townhouse, the favorable lease term, and the responsive property management services that address maintenance issues within 24 hours all reflect careful coordination through Wellington Properties' residential division, which creates housing opportunities for young professionals who contribute to community vitality while ensuring that rental rates remain accessible enough to support economic diversity within gentrifying neighborhoods. The beautiful townhouse, where Bradley and Jessica have built their comfortable life together, featuring original hardwood floors, updated kitchen appliances, a private patio perfect for entertaining friends, and a location within walking distance of Magnolia's best restaurants and shops, wasn't just a fortunate real estate discovery that happened to meet their lifestyle requirements at an affordable price. The property's transformation from a rundown rental that had been neglected by previous owners into a showcase example of thoughtful residential renovation represented 18 months of strategic development, coordinated by Wellington Properties' construction division, which creates housing that serves as a model for sustainable community development. The high-speed internet service that enables Bradley and Jessica to work from home when needed, the energy-efficient heating and cooling systems that keep their utility costs manageable, and the security features that provide peace of mind in an urban environment, weren't standard features that came with their lease. They were custom installations, funded through Wellington Properties' infrastructure investment program, designed to provide tenants with the quality of life amenities that enable them to thrive professionally and personally, while building the kind of community connections that contribute to neighborhood social capital and long-term stability. But perhaps the most significant benefit that Bradley and Jessica have never recognized is the strategic property management that has maintained their housing costs at levels significantly below market rate, while ensuring that their neighborhood continues to attract the kind of residents and businesses that make Magnolia an increasingly desirable place to live. The rent stabilization policies that have limited their annual increases to 3%, despite rapidly rising property values throughout Seattle, the responsive maintenance services that address issues before they become expensive problems, and the community development initiatives that have improved local amenities and transportation access, all reflect strategic decisions designed to support long-term residents, while managing neighborhood change in ways that benefit existing community members. The tragic irony is that Bradley and Jessica's comfortable lifestyle, professional opportunities, and social connections within the Magnolia community all depend on the kind of thoughtful property management and community development that I've been coordinating through Wellington Properties. They systematically dismiss me as an irrelevant, elderly neighbor who doesn't understand modern life or deserve respect for my perspectives and community contribution. My goal was always to create housing opportunities that enabled young professionals like Bradley and Jessica to build authentic careers and meaningful lives within communities that valued both innovation and intergenerational wisdom, never imagining that success and comfort would transform them into people who treated elderly neighbors as obstacles to their enjoyment, rather than recognizing that sometimes the most powerful lesson any community can provide is understanding that respect and consideration determine whether neighborhoods develop as inclusive environments that honor wisdom, experience, alongside youth and professional achievement. Before we dive into exactly how Bradley Harrison and Jessica Chen transformed from grateful tenants into entitled neighbors who thought they could dismiss their elderly landlord as irrelevant, I need you to understand something crucial about the psychology of rental relationships and the dangerous assumptions that young professionals make about elderly property owners in gentrifying neighborhoods throughout America. This story isn't just about one disrespectful couple who made the mistake of underestimating a widow's authority and business acumen. It's about the systematic ageism and classism that enables entitled tenants to treat elderly landlords as powerless obstacles rather than recognizing them as the decision makers whose policies determine whether rental housing remains affordable. Neighborhoods maintain their character, and communities develop in ways that serve long-term residents, alongside newcomers seeking authentic urban living experiences. If you've ever been dismissed because of your age, gender, or apparent social status, make sure to hit that like button right now, because this story will validate every frustration you've experienced with people who judge others based on superficial characteristics, rather than taking time to understand the complete picture of someone's capabilities and authority. If you've dealt with entitled neighbors who thought they could walk all over you because they assumed you lacked power or influence, drop a comment about your worst experience with people who discovered they had seriously misjudged your situation and capability. And definitely subscribe to this channel, because you absolutely will not believe what happens when disrespectful tenants discover that their powerless old lady neighbor actually owns not just their house, but the entire neighborhood infrastructure that enables their comfortable lifestyle, professional opportunities, and social connections. Trust me when I tell you that this story gets progressively more satisfying as Bradley and Jessica's assumptions about elderly vulnerability collide with the reality of exactly who they've been systematically disrespecting for 3 years. The comments on this channel consistently tell me that viewers' favorite stories involve entitled people who dismiss others based on age, appearance, or perceived social status, only to discover that their victims possess exactly the kind of authority and influence necessary to transform comfortable assumptions into devastating consequences. This particular story delivers that satisfaction in ways that will make you want to share it with every person you know who's been underestimated because others assumed that age, gender, or modest lifestyle indicated weakness rather than strategic choice. What makes this story particularly compelling is how completely Bradley and Jessica convinced themselves that their systematic disrespect and neighborhood disruption represented acceptable behavior towards someone they perceived as powerless, never recognizing that their comfortable rental situation depended entirely on the goodwill and strategic patience of the woman whose authority they were systematically challenging through their entitled attitude and complete dismissal of community standards that had maintained neighborhood harmony for decades. The rental housing market throughout Seattle and the broader Pacific Northwest has become increasingly competitive as population growth, job opportunity, and lifestyle preferences drive young professionals to seek housing in established neighborhoods where they can access urban amenities while building the kind of community connections that support both career advancement and personal fulfillment. This market pressure creates situations where tenants often assume that landlords depend on rental income and therefore lack significant leverage in tenant relationships, never understanding that some property owners possess enough resources and alternative options to prioritize community standards over maximum profit extraction. Bradley Harrison, a 28-year-old software developer working for a mid-sized tech company in South Lake Union, and Jessica Chen, a 26-year-old marketing specialist employed by a prominent Seattle advertising agency, represent exactly the kind of young professionals who've transformed neighborhoods throughout the Pacific Northwest over the past decade. Their combined household income
annually, places them comfortably in Seattle's upper middle class, enabling them to afford the kind of housing, dining, entertainment, and lifestyle choices that reflect successful careers in competitive industries that attract educated, ambitious workers from throughout the United States. Their decision to rent in Magnolia, rather than purchasing property, reflected strategic career planning that prioritized flexibility, lifestyle access, and financial optimization over the long-term investment and community commitment that characterizes traditional homeownership patterns. The rental market enabled them to access a neighborhood that would have required significantly more capital investment to purchase, while maintaining the career mobility that allows young professionals to pursue opportunities in different cities or industries, without the complications of property ownership and real estate transactions.
But their approach to rental housing also reflected assumptions about landlord-tenant relationships that prioritize their convenience and lifestyle preferences over community integration and respect for established neighborhood standards that had maintained Magnolia's character and social cohesion throughout decades of economic and demographic change. Their attitude toward rental property suggested that monthly payments entitled them to treat their housing situation as a commercial service relationship, rather than recognizing that residential communities require mutual respect, consideration, and contribution to maintain the social fabric that makes neighborhoods attractive to long-term residents and newcomers alike. The transformation of Bradley and Jessica from grateful tenants who appreciated securing beautiful housing in a desirable neighborhood into entitled residents who dismissed community standards and elderly neighbors as obstacles to their lifestyle preferences, represents a pattern that property managers and longtime community residents observe throughout gentrifying neighborhoods in major metropolitan areas. The initial gratitude and community engagement characterizes new residents during their first months in established neighborhoods, often gives way to assumptions about privilege and authority that enable systematic disrespect for existing community members and the social norms that have maintained neighborhood stability and character. Their growing sense of entitlement reflected broader cultural assumptions about age, authority, and social relevance that enable young professionals to dismiss elderly community members as irrelevant obstacles rather than recognizing them as the institutional memory, community leadership, and often the property ownership that determines whether neighborhoods develop in ways that serve diverse populations or become exclusive enclaves that prioritize profit and convenience over social cohesion and intergenerational respect. The specific incidents that escalated Bradley and Jessica's disrespectful behavior toward me began approximately 18 months after they moved into their Magnolia townhouse. When their initial period of grateful adaptation to neighborhood norms and community expectations gave way to increasing impatience with what they perceived as outdated social standards and unnecessary restrictions on their lifestyle choices and entertainment preferences. Their assumption that rental payments entitled them to prioritize their convenience over community harmony represented a fundamental misunderstanding of how residential neighborhoods maintain the social capital and mutual consideration that makes them attractive places to live for people across different life stages and economic circumstances. The party noise that became a consistent source of neighborhood disruption started with occasional weekend gatherings that extended past reasonable hours and gradually escalated into weekly events that featured amplified music. Large groups of guests who didn't understand or respect neighborhood parking limitations and social activities that spilled into common areas and created disturbances that affected elderly residents, families with young children, working professionals who required quiet environments for rest and productivity. Their response to polite requests from neighbors about noise levels and party management revealed a systematic dismissal of community standards and elderly concerns that reflected deeper assumptions about who comfort and lifestyle priorities deserved consideration within shared residential environments. Rather than recognizing that neighborhood harmony requires mutual accommodation and respect for diverse needs, Bradley and Jessica interpreted community feedback as interference from people who didn't understand or appreciate their social preferences and lifestyle choices. The property maintenance issues that became a source of ongoing tension between us began when Bradley and Jessica started treating their rental townhouse and surrounding common areas as if they owned the property and could modify or neglect maintenance responsibilities according to their personal preferences, rather than lease obligations and community standards that maintain property values and neighborhood appearance. Their assumption that rental payments entitled them to make decisions about landscaping, parking, exterior modifications, and common area usage, without consultation or approval, reflected fundamental misunderstanding of property rights and community responsibility. Their systematic dismissal of my attempts to address these issues through polite conversation and written communication revealed growing assumptions about my authority and relevance that enabled them to treat property management concerns as suggestions rather than requirements that determined whether their lease would be renewed and their continued residence in the neighborhood would be welcomed by the community and supported by property ownership decisions that prioritized community harmony over rental income maximization. But perhaps the most troubling aspect of Bradley and Jessica's evolving attitude toward neighborhood relationships was their systematic strategy for dismissing elderly residents' concerns and community input through ageist assumptions about technological competence, social relevance, and authority to influence neighborhood decisions that affected property values, community character, and the quality of life that attracted diverse residents to choose Magnolia as their long-term home base. Their comments about old people who don't understand modern life and need to accept that neighborhoods change, and young professionals deserve to enjoy their homes without interference from people stuck in the past, revealed sophisticated understanding of how ageist stereotypes could be used to justify systematic disrespect and community disruption while maintaining the comfort illusion that their behavior represented progress and social advancement, rather than selfish entitlement, that undermined the community values and intergenerational respect that had made their neighborhood attractive in the first place. The way Bradley and Jessica discussed elderly neighbors, their friends and professional colleagues, during social gatherings that I could overhear from my adjacent property revealed depths of condescension and systematic dismissal that went far beyond simple impatience with generational differences or lifestyle preferences. Their assumption that age automatically indicated irrelevance, technological incompetence, and lack of authority to influence community decisions demonstrated the kind of systematic ageism that enables younger community members to treat elderly residents as obstacles to overcome, rather than recognizing them as the institutional knowledge, property ownership, and community leadership that determines whether neighborhoods maintain their character and appeal over time. The casual way they discussed strategies for dealing with elderly neighbors who raised concerns about noise, property maintenance, and community standards revealed calculated planning for systematic dismissal and community marginalization that violated every principle of neighborhood respect and intergenerational cooperation that maintains residential community harmony and social cohesion across different life stages and economic circumstances. As Bradley and Jessica's sense of entitlement and systematic disrespect escalated over the months leading up to our final confrontation, they began treating their rental situation as if they possessed inherent rights to prioritize their convenience over community standards, dismiss elderly concerns as irrelevant interference, and make decisions about property use and neighborhood relationships based solely on their personal preferences, rather than recognizing that residential communities require mutual respect, consideration, and contribution to maintain the social environment that makes them attractive places to live for diverse populations. The September 14th board meeting, that occupied my afternoon while Bradley and Jessica assumed I was at a routine medical appointment, had been particularly significant because Wellington Properties Executive Committee was finalizing tenant evaluation policies that would determine which residents demonstrated sufficient community contribution and neighborhood respect to justify lease renewal consideration, and which tenants had violated community standards enough to warrant immediate termination and replacement with residents who understood that rental housing in desirable neighborhoods requires ongoing demonstration of respect for property ownership, authority, and community harmony maintenance. Irony that Bradley and Jessica were simultaneously planning their weekend party that would violate multiple noise ordinances and community standards, while I was coordinating property management policies that would determine their continued residence in the neighborhood, created the perfect setup, a lesson about respect, authority, and the consequences that follow when entitled assumptions about elderly powerlessness collide with the reality of property ownership and community leadership that determines who gets to stay and who has to go. The systematic documentation that I had been maintaining throughout their lease period included detailed records of noise complaints from multiple neighbors, photographic evidence of property maintenance violations, written communications regarding community standards that had been ignored or dismissed, and witness statements from long-term residents who had observed the escalating pattern of disrespectful behavior that threatened the neighborhood harmony and property values that had made Magnolia an attractive residential community for diverse populations across different economic circumstances and life stages. But perhaps the most damaging evidence against Bradley and Jessica's continued tenancy was their systematic strategy for dismissing elderly residents as irrelevant obstacles, whose concerns about community standards deserved no consideration in decisions about noise levels, property maintenance, guest management, and the basic courtesy that enables residential neighborhoods to function as supportive environments for people who choose to invest their time, energy, and financial resources in building long-term community connections, rather than treating housing as a temporary convenience that requires no contribution to neighborhood social capital or intergenerational respect. The legal framework that governed their tenancy included specific provisions about community standards, neighbor relation, and property maintenance that provided clear grounds for lease termination when tenants demonstrated systematic disrespect for community harmony and property ownership authority. But my preference had always been to work with residents to address concerns through education and communication, than resorting to the legal remedies that could force immediate relocation and create hardship for people who might learn from their mistakes and develop into contributing community members who understood that rental housing in desirable neighborhoods represents privilege that requires demonstration of respect and consideration. The transformation that I was about to witness in Bradley and Jessica's attitude toward elderly authority and community responsibility would either provide evidence that they possessed the character development potential necessary for continued resident and neighborhood that valued intergenerational respect alongside professional success, or it would confirm that their systematic dismissal of community standards represented fundamental character flaws that justified immediate termination of their housing privilege and replacement with tenants, understood that comfortable living situations require mutual respect and consideration for all community members, regardless of age, social status, or perceived authority. The careful balance I've maintained between my public identity as Margaret Wellington, the widowed retiree, and my private role as the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire requires constant attention to detail and strategic performance that would challenge even the most accomplished actors. Every aspect of my daily routine, from the clothes I wear to the conversations I have with neighbors, has been deliberately designed to reinforce assumptions about elderly limitations while concealing the sophisticated business operations that determine housing policy, community development, and economic opportunity throughout the Pacific Northwest. My transformation into this carefully crafted persona began 14 years ago when my beloved husband Robert passed away from complications related to his military service in Vietnam. Robert had been my partner in both life and business, serving as the public face of Wellington Properties, while I focused on strategic planning and operational management from behind the scenes. His sudden death at age 67 forced me to choose between stepping into a highly visible corporate leadership role or developing alternative approaches to business management that would protect both my privacy and my safety, while maintaining operational control over our extensive property holdings and development projects. The decision to assume a modest public identity while directing business operations through encrypted communications and trusted intermediaries wasn't motivated by fear or insecurity, but rather by strategic understanding of how elderly women are perceived and treated within business environments that often dismiss female authority and systematically undervalue the insights and capabilities that come with decades of experience in competitive markets and complex organizational management. Robert and I had built Wellington Properties together over 35 years of partnership that began when we were newlyweds in our 20s, pooling our modest savings to purchase our first rental property, a small duplex in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood that required extensive renovation but offered the potential for steady rental income that could supplement Robert's construction work and my teaching salary, while we saved money for larger investment opportunities and family planning. Those early years of property management taught us invaluable lessons about tenant relation maintenance coordination, neighborhood dynamics, and the financial planning required to transform small-scale rental income into systematic wealth accumulation that could support both family security and community investment goals. We learned to identify properties with development potential, coordinate renovation projects that enhanced both property values and tenant satisfaction, and build relationships with contractors, suppliers, and municipal officials that would enable increasingly sophisticated real estate projects as our capital resources and market knowledge expanded. The gradual expansion of our property portfolio throughout the 1980s and 1990s reflected careful strategic planning that prioritized sustainable growth over rapid speculation, community contribution over maximum profit extraction, long-term relationship building over short-term financial advantage. We reinvested rental income into additional property acquisitions, used equity appreciation to finance larger development projects, and developed expertise in zoning regulations, construction management, and market analysis that enabled us to identify opportunities that other investors overlooked or lacked the patience and capital resources to pursue effectively. By the time Robert passed away in 2010, Wellington Properties had grown into a regional powerhouse with holdings throughout Washington, Oregon, Northern California, and expanding operations in Colorado, Nevada, and Arizona. Our portfolio included over 12 major commercial developments, 6 mixed-use projects that combined residential and retail components, and strategic partnerships with municipal governments that gave us preferred access to development opportunities and public-private collaboration projects that shaped community planning throughout the Pacific Northwest. But Robert's death created both operational challenges and strategic opportunities that would determine whether Wellington Properties continued as a family business focused primarily on regional development, or evolved into a major national player with the resources and influence necessary to affect housing policy, urban planning, and economic development on a scale that could impact millions of people across multiple states and market segments. The grief of losing Robert after 43 years of marriage was compounded by immediate pressure from investors, competitive and municipal partners who questioned whether a 60-year-old widow possessed the experience and authority necessary to maintain Wellington Properties' growth trajectory and honor the complex commitments that Robert had made to development projects, tenant community, and strategic partnerships that required consistent leadership and decision-making authority over multi-year timelines and changing market conditions. The assumption that Robert had been the primary decision-maker and strategic visionary behind Wellington Properties' success reflected systematic gender bias that dismissed my contributions to business development, financial planning, and operational management, despite clear evidence that I had been coordinating many of the company's most successful projects and strategic initiatives throughout our partnership. The subtle and not-so-subtle suggestions that I should consider selling the company
or accepting a reduced role decision-making, revealed how quickly business relationships could change when male leadership was no longer available to provide the public face and authority that many investors and partners felt comfortable recognizing and respecting. Rather than fighting these perceptions directly through media campaigns or public demonstrations of my business capabilities, I chose to use the systematic underestimation of my authority and competence as strategic advantages that would enable unprecedented expansion and market positioning, maintaining the privacy and operational security that had always been important to Robert and me, but became even more crucial when operating without the protection and partnership that had characterized our previous business activity. The creation of my modest widow persona began with strategic decisions about housing, transportation, and public behavior that would reinforce assumptions about limited resources and technological competence, while providing perfect cover for sophisticated business operations that required constant communication with development teams, financial partners, and municipal officials throughout North America, and increasingly with international investors who were interested in Pacific Northwest real estate opportunities. The purchase of my current house in Magnolia represented strategic positioning that provided both operational headquarters and community integration that would enable me to understand neighborhood dynamics, property value, and development opportunities from the perspective of a long-term resident, rather than an external investor whose decisions might benefit shareholders but harm community stability and social cohesion that made neighborhoods attractive places to live for diverse populations. The modest craftsman house that would become both my home and secret command center required extensive renovation to accommodate the technology infrastructure and security systems necessary for international business operations, while maintaining the external appearance of a simple retirement residence that would attract attention from neighbors, media, or competitors who might try to exploit information about my location, daily routines, or business activities for strategic advantage or security threat. The basement renovation that created my hidden office and server facilities was coordinated through a network of specialized contractors who believed they were working on different projects for different clients, ensuring that no single individual or company understood the complete scope of the technology installation or could connect the sophisticated business infrastructure to my public identity as a widowed retiree. The security systems that protect both my physical safety and business operations include real-time monitoring that would alert private security teams and law enforcement within minutes if threats were detected, while the encrypted communication networks ensure that business discussions and strategic planning remain protected from corporate espionage or government surveillance that could compromise competitive advantages or strategic partnership. The daily performance of elderly helplessness and technological confusion that I maintain during interactions with neighbors, service providers, and community members requires careful attention to consistency and believability, while ensuring that I don't inadvertently reveal information or capabilities that would compromise my cover identity. The smartphone difficulties, computer confusion, and general befuddlement about modern systems that I display during public interactions must appear authentic enough to convince observers, but not be so extreme as to raise questions about my competence to live independently or manage basic life responsibility. The wardrobe choices that reinforce my modest widow image include careful selection of clothing brands, accessories, and maintenance standards that suggest someone who shops at discount retailers, prioritizes practicality over fashion, maintains her belongings carefully because replacement costs strain a fixed income budget. The sensible cardigans, comfortable shoes, and practical handbags that I wear during community interactions must appear authentic, while concealing the sophisticated communication devices and security equipment that enable constant coordination with business operations and personal protection services. The social activities that provide cover for my business schedule include regular participation in community organizations, volunteer activities, and neighborhood events that demonstrate community engagement while providing legitimate reasons for schedule flexibility and occasional absences, might otherwise attract attention or curiosity from neighbors who monitor elderly residents' routines for signs of health problems or family difficulties that might require community intervention or assistance. The book club meetings at the Magnolia Library that I attend monthly provide excellent cover for research activities and strategic planning time, while reinforcing my image as someone whose intellectual stimulation comes primarily from recreational reading, rather than business analysis or market research. The mystery novels and romance books that I check out regularly serve as props for this persona, while providing relaxation during the limited downtime that my actual schedule allows, between board meetings, development, project, coordination, and strategic planning sessions with financial advisors and legal teams. The volunteer work at the community center that I perform weekly creates opportunities for relationship building with diverse community members, while demonstrating the kind of service commitment that maintains my reputation as a caring neighbor whose primary concerns involve community welfare rather than business profits or strategic market positioning. The meal delivery services for homebound seniors that I help coordinate provide legitimate reasons for driving throughout the neighborhood, while conducting property inspections and market analysis that inform development decisions and investment strategy. The carefully maintained garden that provides such pleasure during my morning routine also serves as an excellent observation post for monitoring neighborhood activities, property maintenance standards, and resident behavior patterns that inform tenant evaluation and community development planning. The time I spend tending plants and maintaining landscaping creates opportunities for casual conversations with neighbors that provide valuable intelligence about community concerns, property value, and development opportunities, while reinforcing my image as someone whose primary interests involve horticultural activities rather than real estate speculation or community planning. The modest grocery shopping trips that I take twice weekly to the neighborhood Safeway provide cover for much more extensive supply procurement and logistical coordination that supports both my hidden business operations and emergency preparedness protocols that ensure operational continuity during natural disasters or security threats that might disrupt normal business activities. The careful use of manufacturer coupons and price comparison shopping that neighbors observe reinforces assumptions about fixed income constraints, while the actual grocery purchases include specialty items and communication equipment that support sophisticated business operations and personal security requirements. The church attendance that provides spiritual comfort also creates opportunities for community networking and relationship building that inform understanding of municipal politics, development priorities, and community values that influence zoning decisions and neighborhood planning initiatives. The quiet participation in religious services and social activities reinforces my image as someone whose primary social connections involve traditional institutions rather than business networks or professional organizations that might reveal my actual authority and influence within region development planning. The exercise routine that I maintain through daily walks around the neighborhood serves multiple purposes that include health maintenance, property inspection, resident observation, and the kind of regular presence that establishes me as a familiar community figure whose daily activities provide comfort and stability for neighbors who appreciate seeing consistent signs of safety and community engagement among elderly residents who contribute to neighborhood, social capital, and mutual care networks. The medical appointments that provide convenient explanations for absences during business meetings and travel requirements include both legitimate healthcare maintenance and strategic scheduling that ensures my health remains excellent, while providing cover for the demanding physical and mental requirements of directing complex business operations that require constant decision-making, travel coordination, and strategic planning across multiple time zones and business sectors. The family relationships that I maintain with my adult children provide both emotional support and strategic cover for business activities, while ensuring that my family member remain protected from any potential security threats or business complications that might arise from my involvement in high-stakes real estate, development, and financial markets that operate in competitive environments with significant economic and political implications. My daughter Sarah's nursing career in Denver provides excellent cover for medical consultations and health-related absences, while her professional knowledge of healthcare systems enables valuable insights into medical facility development and senior housing projects that represent growing market opportunities. As Pacific Northwest demographics shift toward older populations that require specialized housing and community services, her distance from Seattle ensures that she remains uninvolved in local business operations, while her visits provide legitimate reasons for schedule adjustments and family obligations that explain occasional unavailability during business hours. My son Michael's work as a high school principal in Portland creates opportunities for educational facility development and community planning insights, while his education background provides valuable perspectives on family housing needs and neighborhood characteristics that attract residents with school-age children. His involvement in community leadership and municipal planning committees provides informal intelligence about development opportunities and regulatory changes that affect real estate markets throughout Oregon and Washington. My youngest daughter Lisa's position as a social worker in Spokane offers insights into affordable housing needs, social service delivery system, and community development programs that inform Wellington Properties' approach to mixed-income housing projects and public-private partnerships that serve diverse populations, while generating sustainable returns for continued investment in community development and economic opportunity creation. The grandchildren visits that provide such joy also create convenient explanations for increased household activity, schedule changes, and temporary alterations to daily routines that might otherwise attract attention from neighbors who monitor elderly residents' patterns for signs of health changes or family difficulty. The presence of visiting family members provides natural cover for increased security protocols and communication activities that ensure business operations continue without interruption during family gatherings and holiday celebrations.
The careful balance between authentic family relationships and strategic business requirements demands constant attention to ensure that my loved ones remain protected from any potential risks or complications, while receiving the emotional support and financial assistance that reflects both my genuine care for their welfare and my responsibility to ensure that family security remains protected regardless of business challenges or market conditions that might affect Wellington Properties operations or my personal safety. The financial planning that provides for family security also creates legitimate explanations for complex legal and investment activities that might otherwise attract attention from regulatory agencies or competitors who monitor business activities for strategic intelligence or potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited for competitive advantage. Estate planning and family trust management that protects both current operations and long-term wealth transfer provides cover for sophisticated financial transactions and investment strategies that enable continued business expansion while ensuring that family welfare remains protected regardless of future business developments or market changes. The insurance policies and emergency planning that protect both family members and business operations include security protocols that could evacuate my family from potential threat situations within hours while maintaining business continuity, backup facilities, and alternative communication networks that ensure Wellington Properties continues operating, even if primary facilities become compromised or unavailable due to natural disasters, security threats, or other emergency situations that require immediate response and alternative operational arrangements. The legal framework that protects both family privacy and business security includes multiple layers of corporate structures, trust arrangements, and confidentiality agreements that ensure public identity remains completely separated from business operations, while family members can access financial support and security protection without understanding or becoming involved in the specific business activities that generate the resources necessary for their protection and long-term security. The community reputation that I've built over 12 years of Magnolia residence provides both operational security and strategic positioning that enables detailed understanding of neighborhood dynamics, property values, and development opportunities, while maintaining the trust and respect of community members who view me as a contributing neighbor whose primary concerns involve community welfare rather than business profits or strategic market manipulation that might threaten neighborhood character or resident security. The relationships I've developed with local business owners, community leaders, and municipal officials through volunteer activities and neighborhood involvement provide valuable intelligence about regulatory changes, development priority, and political dynamics that affect real estate markets, while reinforcing my reputation as someone whose community engagement reflects genuine care rather than strategic positioning for business advantage or political influence that might compromise my privacy or operational security. This carefully constructed identity has served me perfectly for over a decade, enabling unprecedented business expansion and strategic positioning, while maintaining the privacy and security that allow me to direct complex operations without the media attention, regulatory scrutiny, or security threats that often accompany visible wealth and business authority in competitive markets, with significant economic and political implications. But the true test of this strategic deception would come when entitled tenants, like Bradley and Jessica, challenged my authority and dismissed my concern, never suspecting that their comfortable assumptions about elderly powerlessness were about to collide with the reality of exactly who controlled their housing, neighborhood, and future opportunities for continued residence in one of Seattle's most desirable communities. The true scope of Wellington Properties' influence throughout the Pacific Northwest and beyond represents one of the most sophisticated real estate empires in North American history, built through decades of strategic acquisition, innovative development practice, and systematic market positioning that has created fundamental infrastructure dependencies throughout multiple states while remaining completely invisible to public scrutiny, media attention, and regulatory oversight that typically accompanies business operations of this magnitude and regional significance. What Bradley and Jessica dismiss as their elderly neighbor's modest retirement lifestyle actually conceals direct control over 84,700 rental units housing over 180,000 tenants, 180,000 tenants, 185,000 workers, 34 mixed-use developments that serve as community anchors for growing metropolitan areas, and strategic partnerships with municipal governments that influence zoning decisions, infrastructure investment, and economic development planning throughout Washington, Oregon, Northern California, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Utah, Montana, and expanding operations in Alaska, Hawaii, and British Columbia. The corporate structure that enables this unprecedented regional influence operates through a carefully designed network of 247 subsidiary companies, holding corporations, and management entities that ensure both operational efficiency and complete privacy protection, while distributing legal liability and regulatory oversight across multiple jurisdictions and business sectors that prevent any single government agency or regulatory body from understanding the complete scope of our integrated operations and market influence. Wellington Residential Holdings serves as the umbrella organization for property management operations that house nearly 200,000 people throughout the western United States, providing everything from luxury downtown apartments that attract young professionals and established executives to affordable housing complexes that enable working families to access quality housing within commuting distance of employment opportunities and community service. Our residential portfolio includes high-rise apartment towers in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and Denver that provide urban living options for professionals who prioritize location and amenity, garden-style apartment complexes in suburban communities that offer families access to excellent schools and recreational facilities, and mixed-income developments that create diverse communities where residents across different economic circumstances can build social connections and mutual support networks. The property management philosophy that guides our residential operations prioritizes long-term community development over short-term profit maximization, focusing on tenant satisfaction, maintenance excellence, and neighborhood integration that creates stable communities where residents want to establish roots rather than treating housing as temporary accommodation between career moves or life transitions. This approach requires higher upfront investment in property improvements, maintenance system, and tenant services, but generates superior long-term returns through reduced turnover, enhanced property values, and community development that attracts quality residents who contribute to neighborhood social capital and economic stability. Wellington Commercial Development coordinates the design and construction of office buildings, retail centers, industrial facilities, and specialized commercial properties that provide employment opportunities and business services for growing communities throughout our operational region. Our commercial portfolio includes downtown office towers that house major corporations and government agencies, suburban office parks that accommodate technology companies and professional service firms, retail shopping centers that serve diverse communities while supporting local businesses and entrepreneurship, and industrial complexes that provide manufacturing and distribution capabilities for businesses that require strategic location access to transportation networks and skilled workforce population. The commercial development process that characterizes Wellington projects emphasizes sustainable construction practices, energy efficiency, and community integration that creates business environments supporting both economic growth and environmental responsibility. Our buildings achieve LEED certification through innovative design features, renewable energy system, and resource conservation practices that reduce operational costs for tenants while demonstrating corporate environmental leadership that attracts businesses committed to sustainability and social responsibility value. Wellington Investment Partners identifies and develops strategic partnerships with municipal governments, educational institutions, healthcare systems, and private corporations that create public-private collaboration opportunities for community development projects that benefit multiple stakeholders, while generating sustainable returns for continued investment in regional economic growth and social infrastructure improvement. These partnerships enable complex projects that combine residential housing, commercial space, recreational facilities, educational resources, and healthcare services into integrated developments that serve as community anchors and economic development catalysts for growing metropolitan areas. The municipal partnerships that provide Wellington Properties with preferred access to development opportunities also create obligations for community contribution and social responsibilities that influence project design, tenant selection, and operational policies throughout our portfolio. These commitments include affordable housing requirements that ensure our developments serve diverse populations, local hiring preferences that provide employment opportunities for regional residents, and community benefit programs that support education, healthcare, and social services for neighborhoods affected by development projects. Wellington Financial Services coordinates the complex investment strategies and capital management that enable continued business expansion while maintaining the liquidity and flexibility necessary for strategic opportunity response and market condition adaptation. Our financial operations include private equity partnerships with institutional investors, debt financing arrangements with major banks and insurance companies, joint venture agreements with international development partners, and specialized investment vehicles that enable participation in large-scale infrastructure projects and regional economic development initiatives. The financial management systems that support Wellington Properties operations require sophisticated analysis of market trends, regulatory changes, demographic shifts, and economic conditions that affect real estate values, rental demand, construction costs, and financing availability across multiple geographic regions and property sectors. Our financial team includes economists, market analysts, regulatory specialists, and investment professionals who monitor conditions affecting our existing portfolio, while identifying opportunities for strategic expansion and market positioning that enhance long-term value and operational sustainability. Wellington Technology Solutions develops and implements the advanced information systems that enable coordination of complex operations across multiple states and business sectors, while maintaining the security and privacy protections necessary for competitive advantage and regulatory compliance. Our technology infrastructure includes enterprise resource planning systems that integrate property management, financial reporting, and operational coordination across thousands of properties and hundreds of thousands of tenants. Communication networks that enable real-time collaboration between development teams throughout North America, and data analysis capabilities that identify market trends and investment opportunities before they become apparent to competitors or public market. The cybersecurity protocols that protect Wellington Properties operations include multiple layers of encryption, access control, and monitoring systems that prevent unauthorized access to sensitive business information, while ensuring that legitimate users can access necessary resources from secure locations throughout our operational network. These security measures protect both business intelligence and tenant privacy, while ensuring compliance with regulatory requirements for data protection and information security across multiple jurisdictions, with different legal standards and enforcement mechanisms. Wellington Legal Affairs coordinates the complex regulatory compliance and legal strategy requirements that enable operations across multiple states and business sectors, while protecting both corporate interests and community commitments through sophisticated contract negotiation, dispute resolution, and strategic planning that anticipates regulatory changes and market developments affecting real estate development and property management operations. Our legal team includes specialists in zoning law, environmental regulation, construction contracts, tenant rights, municipal financing, and international business law, who ensure that all Wellington Properties activities comply with applicable regulations, while maximizing strategic flexibility and competitive positioning. The legal framework that enables Wellington Properties privacy protection. Operational security includes multiple corporate structures that distribute ownership and management authority across different jurisdictions, while maintaining coordinated strategic direction and operational control through contractual relationships and management agreements that withstand scrutiny, while protecting sensitive business information and strategic planning from competitors and regulatory oversight that might compromise competitive advantage. Wellington Environmental Services ensures that all development projects and property management operations meet or exceed environmental protection standards, while implementing sustainable practices that reduce resource consumption, minimize waste generation, and contribute to community environmental health and long-term ecological sustainability. Our environmental programs include renewable energy installation, water conservation systems, waste reduction initiatives, and green building practices that demonstrate corporate environmental responsibility while reducing operational costs and enhancing property values for long-term investments sustainability. The environmental commitments that guide Wellington Properties operations reflect both regulatory compliance requirements and strategic positioning that attracts environmentally conscious tenants, investors, and municipal partners who prioritize sustainability and social responsibility in business relationships and community development planning. These commitments require ongoing investment in technology upgrades, operational improvements, and staff training that ensure environmental goals remain integrated with business objectives and financial performance requirements. The regional influence that Wellington Properties exercises through this integrated network of residential, commercial, and development operations creates fundamental infrastructure dependencies that extend far beyond direct property ownership to include transportation systems, utility networks, municipal services, and economic relationships that affect millions of people throughout the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Our properties house families whose children attend schools funded by property taxes,
from our development.
Employ workers whose spending supports local businesses throughout our operational regions, and create demand for professional services, retail businesses, and recreational facilities that shape community character and economic opportunity throughout growing metropolitan area. The economic impact that Wellington Properties generates through direct employment, construction activity, property tax payment, and consumer spending by our tenants and employees contributes billions of dollars annually to regional economic activity while supporting thousands of businesses and hundreds of thousands of jobs throughout our operational network. This economic influence creates both opportunities and responsibilities for community leadership and social contribution that extend beyond traditional property management and development activities to include active participation in regional planning, policy, development, and community investment initiatives that affect long-term economic growth and social stability. The strategic intelligence capabilities that enable Wellington Properties market leadership include sophisticated monitoring of demographic trends, economic indicators, regulatory developments, and competitive activities that affect real estate markets throughout our operational region. Our research and analysis capabilities include partnerships with academic institutions, government agencies, and private research organizations that provide access to data and analytical resources that inform strategic planning and investment decision-making across multiple market sectors and geographic regions. The competitive advantages that result from this comprehensive intelligence gathering and analysis capability enable Wellington Properties to identify investment opportunities, market trends, and development possibilities before they become apparent to competitors or public market, creating opportunities for strategic positioning and market leadership that generate superior returns while contributing to community development and economic growth that benefits multiple stakeholders throughout our operational network. The international expansion capabilities that Wellington Properties has developed through partnerships with foreign investors, multinational corporations, and international development organizations create opportunities for strategic growth beyond North American markets, while bringing foreign investment and expertise to Pacific Northwest development projects that enhance regional economic competitiveness and international business relationships. The global perspective that informs Wellington Properties' strategic planning includes analysis of international real estate markets, global economic trends, and international regulatory developments that affect business operations, while identifying opportunities for technology transfer, investment partnerships, and market expansion that enhance long-term growth prospects and competitive positioning in increasingly globalized real estate and development market. The philanthropic activities that complement Wellington Properties' business operations include substantial contributions to educational institutions, healthcare systems, environmental organizations, and community development initiatives that reflect corporate social responsibility commitments while supporting long-term community, health, and economic opportunity development throughout our operational region. These philanthropic investments create both social impact and strategic business relationships that enhance community support for development projects while contributing to regional quality of life that attracts residents, businesses, and investors who value social responsibility and community engagement. The community leadership role that Wellington Properties exercises through this comprehensive approach to business operations and social contribution creates both influence and responsibility for regional economic development, environmental protection, and social progress that extends far beyond traditional real estate development and property management activities to include active participation in policy development, community, and regional coordination initiatives that affect millions of people throughout the Pacific Northwest and beyond. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Wellington Properties' comprehensive regional influence is how completely this massive business empire has remained hidden from public awareness, media attention, and regulatory scrutiny through strategic privacy protection
and operational decentralization that enables unprecedented market leadership while maintaining the security and flexibility necessary for continued growth and adaptation to changing market conditions and competitive environments. The invisibility that characterizes Wellington Properties operations reflects both strategic choice and operational necessity in competitive markets where public visibility can attract unwanted attention from competitors, regulators, media organizations, and activist groups that might attempt to exploit information about business operations for strategic advantage or ideological purposes that could compromise operational effectiveness and market positioning. This comprehensive but hidden influence creates the perfect foundation for the devastating lesson that Bradley and Jessica are about to receive about the dangerous consequences of dismissing elderly neighbors as powerless obstacles rather than recognizing that sometimes the most modest appearances conceal the most significant authority, and that respect for community members should never depend on assumptions about their apparent social status or economic influence. Bradley Harrison and Jessica Chen arrived in Seattle 3 years ago as ambitious young professionals whose career trajectories and lifestyle aspirations perfectly embodied the demographic transformation that has reshaped Pacific Northwest neighborhoods over the past decade. Their combined presence in Magnolia represented exactly the kind of educated, financially comfortable residents that Wellington Properties' community development strategy was designed to attract while maintaining neighborhood diversity and intergenerational balance that preserves community character alongside economic growth and professional opportunity. Bradley's background as a software developer reflected the technology industry's continued expansion throughout the Seattle metropolitan area, where companies like Amazon, Microsoft, and hundreds of smaller tech firms have created unprecedented demand for skilled workers who can afford premium housing costs while contributing to regional economic growth and innovation development. His computer science degree from the University of Washington, combined with 5 years of experience at progressively larger technology companies, had positioned him perfectly for the kind of career advancement and financial success that enables young professionals to access desirable neighborhoods and lifestyle amenities while building the professional networks and industry expertise that support long-term career development. Jessica's marketing career with a prominent Seattle advertising agency represented the professional services sector that supports technology industry growth while providing career opportunities for creative professionals who combine analytical skills with communications expertise to help businesses develop as brand identity and market positioning strategies. Her background in digital marketing and social media strategy had made her particularly valuable to clients seeking to navigate rapidly changing consumer behavior patterns and technological platforms that require sophisticated understanding of both traditional marketing principles and emerging digital communication strategies. Their combined household income of $185,000 annually placed them comfortably within Seattle's upper middle class, enabling access to housing, dining, entertainment, lifestyle choices that reflected successful career development, while providing financial flexibility for travel, recreation, and the kind of discretionary spending that supports local businesses and contributes to neighborhood economic vitality. Their financial situation represented the economic security that enables young professionals to invest in community relationships and long-term housing stability, rather than treating residential choices as temporary accommodations between career moves or life transition. The initial period of their Magnolia tenancy had been characterized by genuine gratitude and community engagement that reflected their appreciation for securing beautiful housing in one of Seattle's most desirable neighborhoods. Bradley and Jessica had participated in community events, respected neighborhood standards, maintained their property responsibly, and demonstrated the kind of neighborly consideration that contributes to community, social capital, and intergenerational harmony that makes residential neighborhoods attractive places to live for people across different life stages and economic circumstances. Their transformation from respectful tenants into entitled residents who dismissed community standards, and elderly neighbors, began gradually through a series of small incidents and attitude shifts that reflected broader cultural assumptions about authority, relevance, social hierarchy that enable systematic disrespect for community members, who are perceived as lacking power or influence to affect neighborhood decisions and lifestyle choices. The party noise that became a consistent source of neighborhood disruption began approximately 18 months into their lease period, when Bradley and Jessica's initial adaptation to community norms gave way to increasing impatience with what they perceived as outdated restrictions on their social activities and entertainment preferences. Their weekend gatherings gradually expanded from intimate dinners with close friends to larger social events that featured amplified music, extensive alcohol consumption, and guest behavior that violated neighborhood parking regulations and created disturbances that affected elderly residents, families with young children, and working professionals who required quiet environments for rest and productivity. Their response to polite requests from neighbors about noise levels revealed systematic dismissal of community concerns that reflected deeper assumptions about whose comfort and lifestyle priorities deserved consideration within shared residential environments. Rather than recognizing that neighborhood harmony requires mutual accommodation and respect for diverse needs, Bradley and Jessica interpreted community feedback as interference from people who didn't understand or appreciate their social preferences and professional networking requirements. The property maintenance issues that created ongoing tension began when they started treating their rental townhouse as if they owned the property and could modify, neglect, or use common areas according to their personal preferences, rather than lease obligations and community standards. Their assumption that rental payments entitled them to make decisions about landscaping, exterior modifications, guest parking, and shared space usage without consultation or approval reflected fundamentalist understanding of property rights and community responsibility that governs residential neighborhoods. But the most troubling aspect of their evolving attitude was the systematic strategy they developed for dismissing elderly residents' concerns through ageist assumptions about technological competence, social relevance, and authority to influence neighborhood decisions. Their comments about old people who don't understand modern life and need to accept that neighborhoods change revealed sophisticated understanding of how stereotypes could be used to justify disrespectful behavior while maintaining the comfortable illusion that their actions represented progress rather than self-entitlement. The September 14th evening that would transform Bradley and Jessica's comfortable assumptions into devastating reality began when I returned from my Wellington Properties board meeting to find them hosting their largest party yet, a gathering of approximately 30 people that had spilled into common areas with music loud enough to be heard 3 blocks away, and guest behavior that included public urination, property damage, and confrontational responses to neighbors who requested basic courtesy and noise reduction. As I approached my front door at 8, still wearing my professional attire from the board meeting, Bradley noticed my return and decided this represented the perfect opportunity to establish definitively that elderly neighbors had no authority to interfere with their lifestyle choices and social activities. The confrontation that followed would provide exactly the evidence I needed to demonstrate that their systematic disrespect had reached levels that justified immediate lease termination and replacement with tenants who understood that rental housing in desirable neighborhoods requires ongoing demonstration of community respect and consideration.
"Hey, Margaret," Bradley called out loudly enough for his party guest to hear, his speech slightly slurred from alcohol consumption, but his intention clearly focused on public humiliation and authority assertion. "I hope our little gathering isn't disturbing your early bedtime routine. I know how important it is for senior citizens to get their rest so they can wake up early for doctor's appointments and grocery store senior discounts." The cruel laughter from his guests at this deliberate mockery of elderly routines and medical needs revealed the systematic ageism that characterized their social group's attitude toward community relationships and intergenerational respect. Jessica joined the confrontation with obvious enthusiasm for publicly demonstrating their perceived authority over neighborhood standards and elderly concerns. "Bradley's right, Margaret," Jessica said with fake sweetness that couldn't disguise her condescending tone and deliberate disrespect. "Maybe it's time you understood that this neighborhood is changing, and young professionals like us deserve to enjoy our homes without interference from people who are stuck in the past and don't understand how modern social life works." The assumption that I was stuck in the past and lacked understanding of modern social life provided perfect evidence of the ageist thinking that enabled their systematic disrespect for community standards and property management authority. But their next comments would cross lines that transformed neighborhood rudeness into grounds for immediate legal action and lease termination. "Look, lady," Bradley continued, his voice rising with alcohol-fueled confidence and obvious pleasure in having an audience for his elderly humiliation performance. "You need to understand something really important here. You're just a pathetic widow who should shut up and mind her own business. We pay good money to live here, and that means we get to decide how we use our property and when we have parties." The phrase "pathetic widow," delivered with such casual cruelty and systematic dismissal, created the defining moment that would transform their comfortable assumptions about elderly powerlessness into the most expensive lesson about respect and authority that any entitled tenants had ever received. But they weren't finished demonstrating the depths of their disrespect and complete misunderstanding of exactly who they were addressing. "Jessica and I are successful professionals who contribute to this community and understand how the modern world actually works," Bradley continued with obvious satisfaction at having an audience for his authority demonstration. "You're just an old lady living off Social Security who spends her time reading books and feeding pigeons because you're too senile and irrelevant to understand modern business or technology. So why don't you go back inside your little house and let the adults handle neighborhood decisions?" The systematic ageism, gender dismissal, and complete disrespect revealed in this public humiliation attempt provided documented evidence of character failures that justified immediate consequences through Wellington Properties' tenant evaluation and community standards enforcement protocol. But Jessica's contribution to this confrontation would add elements that demonstrated coordinated planning for systematic elderly marginalization and community disruption. "Margaret, here's what's going to happen," Jessica announced with obvious pleasure in delivering what she assumed would be a definitive statement of authority and neighborhood hierarchy. "You're going to stop interfering with our parties, stop complaining about noise levels, and stop pretending that your opinion matters when successful young people are trying to enjoy their lives. You're too old and irrelevant to understand how modern neighborhoods work, and it's time you accepted that your generation needs to step aside and let people who actually matter make decisions about community standards." The assumption that age automatically disqualified me from authority, relevance in modern neighborhoods revealed systematic ageist thinking that enabled them to justify any level of disrespect and community disruption while maintaining comfortable illusions about their own importance and social contribution. But their final statements would provide the evidence necessary for immediate and comprehensive consequences that would transform their assumptions about elderly vulnerability into devastating recognition of their miscalculation. "So here's the deal, Margaret," Bradley said with alcohol-fueled confidence and obvious conviction that he was delivering a decisive victory in neighborhood authority dispute. "You can either shut up and accept that we're in charge here, or you can keep complaining and find out what happens when pathetic widows try to interfere with successful people who actually have power and influence in this community." The threat implicit in "find out what happens," combined with their systematic pattern of elderly dismissal and community disruption, created grounds for immediate legal action and the kind of comprehensive consequences that would demonstrate exactly who possessed actual authority and influence in their community and housing situation. Rather than responding immediately to their public humiliation attempt, I decided to provide Bradley and Jessica with opportunities to demonstrate whether they possessed any capacity for learning or character development that might justify continued residence in a community that valued respect and consideration for all residents regardless of age or perceived social status. "Bradley and Jessica," I said calmly, my voice carrying none of the confusion or uncertainty they expected from their supposed elderly victim, "before we continue this conversation, I think there are some things about your housing situation that you should understand more clearly. The change in my tone and obvious confidence seemed to create momentary uncertainty among their party guests, but Bradley and Jessica interpreted my calm response as evidence of elderly defeat and resignation rather than recognizing it as strategic preparation for systematic revelation of their miscalculation. "There's nothing to understand, old lady," Bradley replied with renewed aggression and obvious pleasure in continuing his public humiliation performance. "We pay rent, which means we get to decide how we live here. You're just a neighbor who needs to mind her own business and accept that young professionals have authority in modern neighborhoods." "Actually, Bradley," I responded while retrieving my phone and accessing the Wellington Properties management interface, "there are several important aspects of your housing situation that you seem to have misunderstood. Let me help clarify exactly who makes decisions about your continued residence in this neighborhood." The sight of my phone displaying sophisticated business applications rather than the simple senior-friendly interface they expected began to create visible confusion among the party guests. But Bradley and Jessica remained convinced that elderly technology use represented unsuccessful attempts to appear competent rather than evidence of actual authority and business capability. "What are you going to do, Margaret?" Jessica asked with cruel amusement and obvious conviction that she was witnessing elderly desperation rather than strategic preparation for comprehensive education about respect and consequences. "Are you going to try to find our landlord and tell on us like some pathetic old tattletale?" "Jessica," I replied while accessing the tenant management system that displayed their complete lease history, payment records, and violation documentation, "I don't need to find your landlord. I am your landlord. I am Margaret Wellington, founder and CEO of Wellington Properties, the company that owns this entire neighborhood, including the townhouse you've been renting for the past 3 years." The complete silence that followed this revelation indicated that the information was too unexpected and contradictory to their assumptions for immediate processing. Bradley's expression shifted through confusion, disbelief, and growing alarm as implications began penetrating his alcohol-influenced thinking and systematic ageist assumptions about elderly capabilities and authority. "That's impossible," Bradley said slowly, his earlier confidence completely evaporated as he processed information that challenged every assumption about neighborhood relationships and his own security in their housing situation. "You're just a confused old lady who lives in a modest house and needs help with technology. You can't own anything important." "Bradley," I said while displaying the Wellington Properties corporate interface showing real-time data from our 43,000 rental units throughout the Pacific Northwest. "The modest lifestyle and occasional requests for technological assistance aren't because I'm confused or incapable. They're strategic choices designed to maintain privacy while evaluating tenants and community members without complications from public recognition or security concern." As I showed them documentation confirming my corporate authority, property deeds listing Wellington Properties as owner of their townhouse and surrounding neighborhood, corporate resolutions naming me as CEO and primary decision maker, and financial statements showing assets worth $2.3 billion. Bradley and Jessica's faces reflected systematic processing of information that contradicted every assumption about elderly vulnerability and their own authority within community relationships. "This can't be real," Jessica whispered, examining documents that provided overwhelming evidence of business authority exceeding their most ambitious career aspirations. "If you control Wellington Properties, then I control the rental property where you live, the shopping centers where you work, the restaurants where you dine, the entertainment venues where you socialize, and the community infrastructure that enables your comfortable lifestyle throughout this region," I confirmed while observing their growing comprehension of how completely their assumptions about elderly powerlessness had been transformed into recognition of their dependence on exactly the person they had been systematically "Your lease agreement includes specific provisions about community standards, neighbor relations, and tenant behavior that determine continued residence eligibility," I explained while accessing their violation documentation that had been accumulating throughout their systematic disrespect and community disruption. "The pattern of noise violations, property maintenance neglect, and systematic disrespect for community members that you've demonstrated over the past 18 months provides clear grounds for immediate lease termination and eviction proceedings. The mention of immediate eviction caused visible panic among their party guests, many of whom began quietly leaving as they recognized that they were witnessing a comprehensive reversal of power dynamics, rather than elderly defeat and humiliation that they had expected to enjoy and share through social media documentation of Bradley and Jessica's authority demonstration. "But we pay our rent on time," Bradley said desperately, his earlier aggression completely replaced by growing recognition that his systematic elderly dismissal had targeted exactly the person whose approval he needed for continued housing security. "We haven't violated any lease terms that would justify eviction, Bradley," I replied while displaying the documented evidence of community standards violations, noise complaints from multiple neighbors, and photographic proof of property damage and neglect. "Systematic disrespect for community members, particularly elderly residents, violates the community standards clauses that are explicitly stated in your lease agreement. The hostile environment you've created for neighborhood residents constitutes grounds for immediate termination." I continued while accessing the emergency eviction protocols that Wellington Properties maintains for situations involving tenant misconduct and community safety concerns. "The public humiliation and ageist threats you've directed toward me this evening constitute harassment of property ownership authority, which triggers immediate lease termination and requires vacating the premises within The 72-hour timeline for complete relocation created immediate practical consequences that transformed their theoretical concerns about housing security into urgent logistical challenges involving moving arrangements, alternative housing searches, and professional reputation management in a competitive rental market where eviction records would severely limit future housing options. "You can't do this to us," Jessica said with obvious desperation and growing understanding that their systematic assumption about elderly powerlessness had created exactly the kind of authority confrontation that could destroy their comfortable lifestyle and professional reputation within their social and business network. "We have rights as tenants. You can't just evict people because of personality conflicts or generation gaps." "Jessica," I responded while displaying the legal framework that governs tenant rights and eviction procedures in Washington state. Tenant rights include protection from discrimination based on protected characteristics, but age-based harassment and systematic disrespect for community standards aren't protected activity. Your behavior toward elderly community members constitutes harassment that creates hostile housing environments for other residents. Moreover, I continued while showing them the documentation required for eviction proceedings, the lease violation notices that you've ignored over the past 6 months, provided adequate warning about community standards requirements. Your decision to escalate disrespectful behavior rather than address community concerns demonstrates unwillingness to maintain the neighborly cooperation that rental housing in residential neighborhoods requires. The systematic documentation of Bradley and Jessica's disrespectful behavior extended beyond their direct interactions with me to include complaints from multiple neighbors who had been affected by their noise violations, property maintenance, neglect, and dismissive responses to community concerns about social activities that disrupted neighborhood harmony and created unsafe conditions for elderly residents and families with young children. The noise complaints filed by 7 different households over the past 18 months demonstrate that your impact on community welfare extends far beyond personal conflicts with individual neighbors. I explained while showing them the comprehensive record of community disruption that their party activities and property management neglect had created throughout their tenancy period. The elderly residents, who have requested transfers to different Wellington Properties buildings because behavior made them feel unsafe and unwelcome, represent exactly the kind of community damage that violates our fundamental commitment to inclusive neighborhoods that serve residents across different life stages and economic circumstances. I continued while displaying transfer requests that documented the broader community impact of their systematic ageist behavior and disrespect for intergenerational cooperation. The transfer requests from longtime community members who had chosen to relocate rather than continue dealing with. Bradley and Jessica's disruptive behavior provided evidence of community damage that extended beyond lease violations, to include systematic erosion of neighborhood social capital and mutual support networks that had made Magnolia an attractive residential choice for diverse populations. Families with young children who have complained about safety concerns related to your party guests and property maintenance neglect represent community welfare issues that affect property values and neighborhood character in ways that influence long-term community sustainability and resident satisfaction. I explained while showing them documentation of safety incidents and maintenance problems that had created liability concerns and insurance complications affecting multiple properties and residents. The eviction record that will appear on your credit reports and rental history will significantly limit your future housing options throughout the Seattle metropolitan area. I continued while explaining the long-term professional and personal consequences that would result from their systematic disrespect and community standards violation. The majority of desirable rental properties in neighborhoods that attract young professionals require background checks and references that include previous landlord evaluations and community conduct assessment. I explained while showing them examples of rental applications that would become unavailable to them once eviction proceedings were completed and documented in public records. Additionally, I continued while accessing the network of property management companies and real estate professionals throughout the Pacific Northwest. Wellington Properties' influence within regional housing markets means that your conduct evaluation will be shared with other landlords and property managers who prioritize community standards and tenant compatibility in their resident selection process. The regional networking that connects property managers and landlords throughout Seattle, Portland, and other Pacific Northwest metropolitan areas creates information sharing systems that enable landlords to identify applicants with histories of community disruption and disrespectful behavior toward neighbors and property management authority. Your employers will also receive notification of eviction proceedings as part of standard background check updates that many companies conduct annually for employees in positions requiring security clearances or professional responsibility assessment. I explained while showing them the professional consequence frameworks that connect housing conduct to employment security in industries requiring community reliability and character verification. The shopping centers, restaurants, entertainment, and recreational facilities where you conduct your personal and professional activities operate on properties owned or managed by Wellington Properties. I continued while displaying the comprehensive network of commercial properties that supported their lifestyle and social connections throughout the region. The preference policies that prioritize community members who demonstrate respect for neighborhood standards and intergenerational cooperation will affect your access to reservations, event hosting, and membership opportunities at venues throughout our commercial network. I explained while showing them how their documented disrespect for elderly community members would influence service availability and social access within business establishments that valued inclusive community relations. Your professional networking and client development activities that depend on access to Wellington Properties commercial venues will be affected by the community conduct assessments that inform our merchant partnerships and event hosting policy. I continued while displaying how their systematic ageism and community disruption would influence business relationship opportunities and professional advancement prospects within industries that relied on Wellington Properties commercial infrastructure. You have 72 hours to remove all personal belongings from the townhouse and return all keys, access cards, and property-related materials to Wellington Properties management. I announced while handing them official eviction notices that had been prepared based on the documented pattern of community standards violations and the evening's harassment incident.
The moving truck arrangements and storage facility requirements necessary for immediate relocation are your responsibility, and failure to vacate within the specified timeline will result in additional legal action and law enforcement involvement that will create further complications for your professional reputations and future housing prospects. I continued while displaying the logistical requirements and legal consequences of their immediate eviction situation. The security deposit and prepaid rent that you've provided will be forfeited to cover community damage remediation, legal fees, and the costs associated with finding replacement tenants who understand that rental housing in desirable neighborhoods requires ongoing demonstration of respect for community standards and elderly residents. I concluded while showing them the financial calculations that would result in complete loss of their housing-related investments and deposits. As Bradley and Jessica stood on the sidewalk 3 days later with their belongings loaded into a moving truck, surrounded by neighbors who had witnessed their systematic disrespect for community standards and elderly residents, they represented a perfect example of how assumptions about age, authority, and social relevance can create devastating consequences when entitled attitudes meet the reality of hidden power and community leadership. The lesson they learned about treating elderly neighbors with respect and recognizing that modest appearances can conceal significant authority began community knowledge that influenced subsequent tenant behavior and neighborhood relationships throughout Magnolia and other Wellington Properties communities, where respect for intergenerational cooperation and community standards determine continued residents' eligibility and social acceptance. The story of how entitled tenants discovered that calling their elderly neighbor a pathetic widow who should shut up and mind her own business could cost them their housing, professional reputation, and community connections became exactly the kind of cautionary tale that reminds everyone that elderly wisdom and hidden authority can transform comfortable assumptions into devastating education about respect, character, and the consequences that follow when systematic disrespect meets the reality of who actually controls the resources and relationships that enable comfortable modern living. Sometimes the most powerful lesson you can teach entitled people who dismiss elderly community members is that age and modest appearances provide perfect cover for the kind of authority and influence that determines whether disrespectful behavior receives tolerance or consequence. The neighbors who screamed, "You're just a pathetic widow, shut up," discovered that respect for elderly residents isn't just moral obligation, it's practical necessity for anyone who wants to maintain their housing security and community standing in neighborhoods where character assessment determines who gets to stay and who has to go. The news of Bradley and Jessica's evictions spread throughout the Magnolia neighborhood within hours of their humiliating departure, creating a ripple effect that fundamentally transformed how residents approached community relationships and intergenerational respect. The story of how two entitled young professionals discovered that their powerless elderly neighbor actually owned their entire neighborhood became the defining example of why assumptions about age and authority can create devastating consequences when disrespectful behavior meets hidden power. Mrs. Chen, the 82-year-old widow who lived 2 blocks away, and had been considering moving to assisted living because Bradley and Jessica's parties made her feel unsafe in her own neighborhood, decided to stay after witnessing how quickly community standards could be enforced when property ownership authority aligned with resident welfare concerns. Her decision to remain in her longtime home represented exactly the kind of community stability that Wellington Properties housing policies were designed to protect and encourage. Within the Seattle tech and marketing communities where Bradley and Jessica had built their professional reputations, word of their eviction created cautionary discussions about the importance of character and community behavior in career development and professional networking. Their former colleagues began sharing stories about the connections between personal conduct and professional opportunities, particularly in industries where business relationships often extend into community and social contact. Jessica's advertising agency quietly removed her from client accounts involving senior living communities and age-focused marketing campaigns, recognizing that her documented ageist behavior created liability concerns for business relationships, requiring sensitivity to elderly perspectives and intergenerational marketing strategy. The agency's decision reflected growing awareness that personal conduct outside the workplace could affect professional credibility and client trust in service industries requiring community engagement and social responsibility. Property managers and landlords throughout the Pacific Northwest began sharing the Bradley and Jessica case study as an example of how tenant screening should include character assessment, alongside financial qualifications and credit history evaluation. The systematic documentation of their community conduct violations provided a template for identifying warning signs of entitled behavior and disrespectful attitudes that could damage neighborhood harmony and resident satisfaction. Wellington Properties' approach to character-based tenant evaluation became a model for other property management companies seeking to balance profit maximization with community development and social responsibility goals. The demonstration that financial success could be achieved while prioritizing resident welfare and community harmony influenced industry practices throughout the region. The financial impact extended beyond housing costs to include higher insurance premiums, reduced access to favorable loan terms, and elimination from consideration for executive housing programs that their employers offered to valued employees. The comprehensive nature of modern background checking meant that their community conduct failures affected multiple aspects of their financial and professional lives. Their social relationships also suffered as friends and colleagues learned about the circumstances of their eviction. The story of calling an elderly neighbor a pathetic widow who should shut up became social media content that damaged their reputations within professional and personal networks that valued community engagement and social responsibility. The contrast between Bradley and Jessica's entitled assumptions and the reality of Margaret Wellington's authority created a powerful lesson about the dangerous consequences of judging people based on appearances, age, or perceived social status. Their story became a cautionary tale shared throughout professional networks about the importance of treating all community members with respect and consideration, regardless of assumptions about their authority or influence. The systematic documentation of how their ageist behavior escalated from casual disrespect to public humiliation attempts provided clear evidence of how entitled attitudes can develop into systematic discrimination that violates both community standards and basic human dignity. Their experience demonstrated that character failures often begin with small acts of disrespect that grow into patterns of behavior that eventually create consequences affecting all aspects of personal and professional life. The transformation of Bradley and Jessica from confident, successful young professionals into cautionary examples of how assumptions about elderly powerlessness can create devastating consequences represents a fundamental lesson about respect, care, and community responsibility that extends far beyond housing relationships to include all aspects of social interaction and professional development. Margaret Wellington's decision to use her hidden authority to enforce community standards rather than simply tolerating disrespectful behavior demonstrated that elderly wisdom combined with strategic power can create educational opportunities that benefit entire communities while protecting vulnerable residents from systematic discrimination and social marginalization. The story of how entitled tenants learned that calling their landlord a pathetic widow could cost them everything they valued about their comfortable lifestyle became the perfect example of why respect for others should never depend on assumptions about their apparent authority or social status, and why character development remains the most important factor in creating sustainable success and meaningful relationships throughout all stages of life.